Class 2 Chapter 9, Operational Marketing Planning in Hospitality and Tourism. The methods of forecasting. A common misconception of forecasting is to think of it as a purely mathematical process. Whilst mathematics and statistics can be involved, forecasters should not ignore more qualitative human information processing. Forecasting methods. The main forecasting methods available are quantitative methods, which typically use mathematics and statistical processes, and qualitative methods which are more the products of human thought. Quantitative techniques. Here data is processed using mathematical techniques. Most good forecasting or spreadsheet software packages provide facilities to perform these processes. Simple moving averages for this method, several figures over a period to time, for instance, monthly sales figures, are added together and divided by the period of time selected, for example 3 months. The trend is produced by adding on the new month and subtracting the original starting month. This method can be used to provide a short-term forecast of sales. It can also be used to predict further into the future. For example, the trend in the environment of personal disposable income might also be analyzed by this method. Whilst simple, this method can quite effective. The skill lies in choosing an appropriate period of time over which to average data, for example, 3 months or 12 months, which should depend on the underlying nature of the marketplace. For instance, in rapidly changing markets a shorter period of time is suggested. Exponentially weighted moving averages. Whilst this method may sound daunting, in reality the mathematics is quite simple. The methods put more emphasis on more recent data, which may reflect a common sense approach in destinations. For instance, the skill in using this method is to choose a weighting factor which reflects the characteristics of the forecast situation. This might be done, for example, by looking at the pattern of sales in previous years. For instance, a travel agent may find that a weighting factor of 0.6, putting quite a lot of emphasis on more recent data, fits last year's sales data quite well. Knowing this, the agent will be able to predict the current year's future sales on the basis of the current year's recent sales. Linear regression analysis. Time series. Linear regression assumes that things change according to one factor and do so at a constant rate. In the case of time series, the assumption is that the factor, for example sales, increases, or decreases, with the passage of time. Linear regression analysis. Other causal factors. Here the assumption is that the factor we are interested in changes according to some other factor. As one factor changes, for example the population's real disposable income, RDI, then so does the other factor, for example the market size for holidays, changes at a constant rate. Multiple regression analysis. The forecaster may be fortunate and discover simply one variable that will affect another, for example the example used above. It is much more likely that the factor to be forecasted is affected by many other variables. Multiple regression can help in this case as it produces a forecasting equation as below. Sales equals 1.8x airtemp plus 2.1sd plus 0.193's advertising expenditure, 240's price minus 181. The hypothetical example might predict visitors to an outdoor theme park, where the weather and disposable income would be the outside variables that affect demand. It is interesting to note that it also includes factors within the control of management, i.e. the expenditure on advertising and price, thus making it a budgeting tool. It is not necessary that the forecaster be able to perform the mathematics, but he or she may need to guide a more expert mathematician in deciding which factors to take into consideration. Econometric models. These are very complex, interrelated equations that model the effect that many factors have on a dependent variable. They are commonplace in trying to forecast the state of economies. Increasingly, larger organizations are trying to use similar models to forecast their own marketplaces, but for most organizations, the mathematics involved will be beyond the ability of those involved in marketing. Leading indicators. Occasionally, managers are fortunate enough to know that as one variable changes, for example, RDI, then sometime after this variation, the factor we are trying to predict, for example, sales of cruises, changes. This is known as a leading indicator. Surveys of buyers' intentions. This is a method carried out by market researchers, and as such, its accuracy should be seen in the light of any survey technique. For high-value items which are planned well in advance, purchasers can tell us what and when they will be buying. This could be a particularly good method in the case of expensive, long-haul holidays. Qualitative methods. These are sometimes known as judgmental methods, as they rely on human thought processing. Whilst more subjective than objective, they are frequently used and indeed can be as good as a quantitative technique to ensure common sense is not ignored. Expert opinion. This can range from true experts who have a deep understanding of particular issues, to unofficial experts who still need to make a prediction about the future, usually the managers concerned with forecasting. Their success is variable, but their insight useful. A variation is the Delphi technique/method whereby experts are interviewed independently. Sales force composite. Here the aggregate view of sales staff is sought as to what sales might be achieved in the future. This is more likely to be of use in the shorter term and, of course, there are managerial issues concerned where the forecast will affect sales objectives, to which a salesperson's remuneration may be related. Put simply, sales staff may be pessimistic when, by being so, they later exceed their targets, which were based on their forecasts, and so achieve greater commissions. Interrelating strategic and operational planning and forecasting. Clearly these three managerial processes should interrelate, unfortunately they often do not. The way this could be done in organizations will vary. What follows is a possible sequence of events that should serve to connect these three processes correctly. The future market size is estimated by extrapolation of past market figures and expert consideration of external environmental factors that may change the market size. The sales force forecasts sales using their knowledge of the market, past sales trends and the external environmental factors as predicted above. They may be assisted in this process by those responsible for the overall forecast. And the forecaster is now in a position to prepare an initial company sales forecast. This then needs to be considered in the light of the organization's basic objectives as set by the strategic planning process. When all these factors have been taken into consideration, we will then have a new sales forecast. Again, this can be compared to our basic objectives. If it is close enough, then our operational plans can go forward. If the shortfall is too great, then we need to reconsider our marketing plans and the cycle described above must be repeated. It is important to recognize that if operational plans cannot generate sufficient sales and profits to meet the sales and profit objectives suggested by the strategic planning process, then perhaps the strategic plans are too ambitious and need to be revised downwards.